right, here is the document we're going to look at today. It's a General Assembly document. It was distributed November 29, 2023 during the 78th session. It relates to agenda item 24, and it's entitled Report of the Third Committee. And looks like it talks about how at the second plenary meeting in September 2023, the General Assembly, on the recommendation of the General Committee, decided to include in the agenda, the 78th session, this item entitled Social Development, and then two subcategories. The first one, implementation of the outcome of the World Summit for Social Development and of the 24th special session of the General Assembly. And then the second sub-item, social development, including questions relating to the world social situation, to youth, aging, persons with disabilities, and the family. So pretty broad range here of items. And let's take a look at the agenda to ensure that it is actually on the agenda. So here's the agenda of the 78th session. Item 24 is indeed there, social development. And then the General Committee decided to, actually the General Assembly decided to allocate it to the third committee. And then if we go to the allocation of agenda items, we'll see here, search for the third committee. And indeed, the third committee here actually has several categories. First one, promotion of sustained economic growth, sustainable development in accordance with the relevant resolutions of the General Assembly and recent UN conferences. And that's one category. And then in that category, they put this report of the third committee, the social development here. By the way, the third committee also has other categories that they look at. These are help to understand what the third committee it does. They have maintenance of international peace and security, promotion of human rights, drug control, crime prevention, combating international terrorism and all its forms and manifestations. And then here's some just administrative, organizational, administrative, and other matters. All right, looking back at the report, after it was allocated to the third committee, then the third committee considered the item, held general discussion, considered proposals, took action on all these dates, including up until November 16, 2023, and this one was distributed November 29. Then it's just putting into the record all of the documents that it had before it. And we see a report of the Secretary General on programs to address homelessness. We have another report of the outcome of the World Summit for Social Development. Here's a bunch of other reports. Then we have the consideration of proposals, and so it looks like there are 9 draft resolutions. Persons with albinism, inclusive policies and programs to address homelessness, including in the aftermath of COVID. Addressing challenges of persons living with a rare disease and their families, implementation of the outcome of the World Summit for Social Development and of the 24th Special Session of the General Assembly, cooperatives in social development, preparations for and observance of the 30th anniversary of the International Year of the Family, follow-up to the Second World Assembly on aging, promoting social integration through social inclusion, and then finally, policies and programs involving youth. So those are the 9 proposals, and then here are the recommendations. The third committee recommends to the General Assembly the adoption of the following draft resolutions, and then they put the long form of the resolutions there at the bottom of the report. So that's the report. Let's get into it. All right, let's go to the website of the General Assembly, and under main committees, we'll see the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth committee. And the third committee, which we're dealing with in this document, is the subject matter in which they review issues is social, humanitarian, and cultural. And the web page here describes themselves as the important part of the work of the committee will focus on the examination of human rights questions. and then also discusses questions relating to the advancement of women, protection of children, indigenous issues, the treatment of refugees, the promotion of fundamental freedoms through the elimination of racism and racial discrimination, and the right to self-determination. Also addresses important social development questions such as issues related to youth, family, aging, person with disabilities, crime prevention, criminal justice, and international drug control. Let's go to the UN chart and we'll see the principal organs. Under the principal organs is the General Assembly, and the General Assembly has subsidiary organs, one of which are the main committees, and the third committee is one of those main committees. And then also want to take a look at one document that I like to look at with regards to the committees. This is a 2004 General Assembly document, and it's titled Historical and Analytical Note on the Practices and Working Methods of the Main Committees. And if we go a little bit down, we can see there's some discussion about the third committee, and it says that it deals with issues relating to the treatment of refugees, population famine, social welfare, racial discrimination, human rights, aging, crime prevention, drug control, advancement of women, protection of children, and indigenous people. And then this goes on to talk about their practices with regards to rotation among regional groups for the position of chairman, and talks about how they work the agenda and so forth. So that gives you an idea of what the third committee works on. All right, going back to our document, the report of the third committee. As we stated earlier, there were there was 9 draft resolutions, but I'm going to touch upon just this one, the L17 Rev 1. And it's entitled Implementation of the Outcome of the World Summit for Social Development and of the 24th Special Session of the General Assembly. So I had not heard of these meetings, so I had to look them up. The World Summit for Social Development, it looks like it happened back in 1995. Here's a web page for it. It happened back in 1995 in Denmark, and it looks as though it was a large meeting with lots of leaders of the world. And at the end, looks like here they had some commitments, and they had commitments. Here, I'll just read a few. They're create an economic, political, social, cultural, and legal environment that will enable people to achieve social development, eradicate absolute poverty by a target date, support full employment, and so forth. So yeah, these are lofty goals and they would be great, but I would imagine that they are very, very difficult to implement to actually have some bottom line results. It's great they're working on it, but these are pretty difficult to achieve, but they are working towards them. And the second half of that draft resolution was the implementation of the outcome from the 24th special session of the General Assembly. I had to look this one up too. I'd never heard of it, but it did take place in 2000. Here's the web page for it, and they call it the Copenhagen Plus 5 because they actually want to review that 1995 World Summit in Copenhagen and wanted to, it says here, they convened it to assess the achievements since the 95 Social Summit of Copenhagen, and that this special session was entitled the World Summit for Social Development and Beyond, Achieving Social Development for All in a Globalizing World. Agreement was reached at the special session on a wide array of initiatives to reduce poverty and spur job growth in the global economy. All right, let's take a look at the draft resolution itself and agenda item 24A. And so just like with all resolutions, they start with their preambular paragraphs, reaffirming all previous resolutions on the implementation of the outcome of the World Summit, which we talked about, and of the 24th Special Session, which we also talked about. And then they also do some recalling, reaffirming, and then here at this paragraph, they introduce the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And now this is quite a monumental task that the UN has undertaken. This 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is a big part of the UN's work right now. And here's that website. They also talk about all these matters here. And then here's their declaration, vision. And then we'll go down to their 17 goals right here. Sustainable development goals. Goal 1, end poverty in all its forms everywhere. Goal 2, end hunger, and so on. Okay, going back to the draft resolution. Again, more preambular paragraphs welcoming the adoption of the political declaration, reaffirming the need to achieve sustainable development. And then let's get to the operative paragraphs. Here we go. Takes note of the report of the Secretary General. Welcomes the reaffirmation by governments of their will and commitment to continue implementing the Copenhagen Declaration on Social Development. So the L17 resolution that they're discussing here seems to be all about the world and social development. And you can see here the title of the L17 is Implementation of the Outcome of the World Summit for Social Development and of the 24th Special Session of the General Assembly. So these are two different meetings. The first one, 1995, was that World Summit for Social Development held in Copenhagen in 1995. And then the second meeting here was the 24th Special Session of the General Assembly entitled World Summit for Social Development and Beyond, Achieving Social Development for All in a Globalizing World, and that was held in 2000. So we had 1995, and then there was a bunch of resolutions about that and what member states are going to do to help the world and the social development. And then apparently 5 years went by, and then they had this 24th special session of the General Assembly to continue that work. And now apparently it looks like the United Nations wants to maybe put down on paper some action items. And this comes on the heels of an upcoming social development meeting to continue this string of meetings. And this one is the World Social Summit in 2025. In the Secretary General report, which is accompanies this draft resolution, the Secretary General requested to convene this World Social Summit in 2025. It's entitled Our Common Agenda. And this also is part of that line that will next hit 2030, and that's the Sustainable Development Goals of 2030. So going back to L17, the draft resolution put forth before the third committee. The committee did adopt the draft resolution. However, after the adoption of the draft resolution, there were statements made by three member states. Number one was Spain on behalf of the entire European Union, the United States of America, and Mexico. These three representatives went before the committee and expressed some objections or disassociated themselves from certain paragraphs. And it's kind of hard to see how one would do that. This is the L17 itself, the resolution. Now, I can't go through all of it. There's just so much here. Here are the preambular paragraphs talking, like, I'll just pick one here at random, affirming its strong support for fair globalization and the need to translate growth into the reduction of inequalities. These are, again, these very lofty macro goals of how, everyone, we should eradicate poverty, everybody should have a great standard of life. That's basically all of these paragraphs we're talking about. And it's kind of hard to see how one would object to it. But there are objections, and they're small. They go to just some, a phrase, maybe a word or two. But it's just interesting to see how things are done in the United Nations. And here I'll show you the actual meeting itself and those objections.
Does any delegation wish to make a statement after the adoption of the draft resolution? I give the floor to Spain.
So up first is Spain, and their objection seems like it's a general objection. They object that the proposed text of the resolution does not put enough emphasis on human rights. Apparently, this push for social development in the world, um, it should not take precedence over an individual human rights.
In this context, the EU reiterates its commitment to continue working with the international community to implement the 2030 Agenda, at the same time as it underscores that these goals cannot be achieved without respecting human rights, guaranteeing non-discrimination, fighting for gender equality, and promoting the participation of civil society.
The United States is disappointed that the text of this resolution addresses issues that are not clearly linked to social development or the work of this committee. We are concerned that portions of this resolution inappropriately call on international financial institutions and other non-UN organizations to take actions, such as providing debt relief, that are beyond the scope of what this body and its resolution should be properly addressing.
Another U.S. objection is what they're calling in their speech, paragraph 66, but actually it's 65, is that how the international community shall enhance its efforts through increasing market access for developing countries. Again, this is the US. We let the market dictate how it wants to behave, and we're not going to step in and require companies to provide access to their services and products to developing countries or to anybody. The actual objection by the United States is that the resolution paragraph contains the word shall, and that apparently it's United Nations practice that member countries cannot be required to do anything. It's more of just, can you please do this? And so they object to the word shall, but I'm sure they're objecting that they should not be required to increase market access for developing countries as the U.S. tries not to dictate private market participants.
Further, the demands in operative paragraph 66 that the international community shall increase market access are wholly unacceptable in a resolution such as this one. We note that General Assembly resolutions should refrain from using language such as shall in reference to actions by member states.
And finally, Mexico speaks after the vote, and they say that their objection is about this World Social Summit that will be held in 2025, and that's because the Secretary General in their report proposed to convene in 2025. And they're objecting specifically that this paragraph has the outcome already determined, and they say that it's probably premature to do that, and that they should wait until whoever the organizers are to come up with that agenda, to come up with the agenda, and to come up with the scope of work in consultation with the other member states. Here it says in this resolution paragraph that the possible summit's outcome should have a social development approach, including the need to place people at the center of development and the pledge to make poverty eradication, full employment, social integration. This is their objection, and they had to speak apparently because of this. Maybe unnecessary, but
We do not agree with preambular paragraph 7 because it prejudges the focus that should be taken on the potential outcome of the Global Social Forum Summit. We think that it is premature to define those issues in this committee when the co-facilitators have not even yet been appointed, and who, once appointed, will need to lead the summit's negotiation process.
so there you have it. A little work from the third committee, the Social, Humanitarian, Cultural Committee of the United Nations General Assembly. And just as we see here, they're trying to pass about 9 resolutions or so. And we just witnessed a meeting where they discussed a few of the issues, and we heard some objections. So this gives you just a little taste of the third committee.